Welcome to the Digital Services Forum, everybody. Today we're going to talk about IT operations management. And I have our agenda up on the screen here today. We'll look at some of the outcomes that we're heading towards with ITOM. And we'll give you a little bit of clear up or demystify a little bit, I think is the way Roland put it when we were talking. Demystify some of how you get there. We're going to do a featured section on something that a lot of people are familiar with, the tag-based service mapping. I'm going to show you in the beginning a roadmap and a capability map that we use inside of enterprise architecture to set up our plan for ITOM. And I'm going to start off with that, and we can use that as a basis to talk about going through. But basically your takeaway today is going to be that material. I'm going to load that material up on our community site so that you have it going forward. And we'll talk a lot about the org change piece. And not necessarily in this order, but this is the agenda today. And we have Kevin here today, who's going to help us talk through some of that and talk about how he's working through that from a platform administrator perspective, or a platform owner perspective, rather, and working with the teams that are taking care of the operational pieces that ITOM covers. So for those of you that are here for the first time, we like to keep a really active chat, because the big takeaway from this, it's a forum, so it's to interact with others on the forum. But please keep an active chat. If it's your first time here today, introduce yourself so that we know where you're from and maybe what you're looking for, and even your role. So keep an active chat. Don't worry about going off on chat or presenting something that you're going to miss, because there's a lot that happens on the chat too that you want to be cognizant of. All right, so let's start with this takeaway, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kevin, and Kevin's going to talk about some of how he's working with people in his company, and then we're going to go. Roland's going to take it home for us. All right. One of the things that I've given on this forum before is a map of the whole ServiceNow platform. And a lot of you have commented how useful it was to have the CSDM roadmap and then be able to click down to all the capabilities. What I did is I broke out a mini section on this with the latest and greatest from Xanadu. And it has all of the IT operations management pieces in there. One of the things that we're going to be able to do here is drill down into discovery or whatever pieces you want and get a little bit of additional information. So when I give you this deck, you need to know that you need to be in presentation mode so you can use the navigation. So if I need to go down and talk about what discovery is and what it does, what the value is, I would be able to click through these different capabilities of the product, right? So any one of these pieces in the middle here, you can click down on and get more information on what that does. It also gives you a really good picture on what the pieces are inside of ITOM. So as you're doing your planning, you can understand that there's value I can get out of different pieces. A lot of people get caught up here and then don't look at some of the other things that have been added to ITOM over the years. There's also a lot of people that are doing quite a bit of planning in the area of AI. So there's AI information down here. Anything with this little symbol on it indicates that there's AI technology being leveraged in that capability. So you'll be able to click on that and, wow, get a pretty fuzzy screen. Get a pretty fuzzy screen on what we're doing. The text is clear, so I didn't notice that one was so fuzzy. But that's what this one's for. Now, the other part of this is sometimes you don't need to talk about just capabilities, like which capabilities are we using to figure out which business problems. Sometimes you're not doing that. Sometimes instead, you're talking about sequencing. Like, I know I need firewall audit. I know I need to get it on the roadmap. I know we're working on it. So the
data and traditional.
Right, I think we have everybody in now. So sometimes it's not just going to be going through the list of saying, oh yeah, I want tag governance. Let's go talk about tag governance. Sometimes instead, when you move up into the next planning phase, what you're talking about instead is the ability to go and talk about it on a sequencing. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of slowness on my computer. I'm going to go off video and see if that helps me at all. All right. So sometimes instead of talking about it this way, what we're talking about it is this way, more on a roadmap. When you communicate these roadmaps, you want to be able to tell a story with the features that you're putting in. So a lot of times if I'm talking about we're on our path to discovery to get an accurate representation of our inventory, and we want to use service graph connectors as a way to decrease the risk in that discovery process. Whatever story you want to tell, I just put this on as an example, but I usually like to keep everything in ITOM, even if you don't own it, right? Keep it over here, but be really clear that we don't own it. So put dotted lines around it saying, this is not a current entitlement today, and put solid lines around it to say, this is what we have. The worst thing is to surprise somebody, even if it's inside your organization, and say, oh, we can do this and this and this and that, but we gotta buy more, right? So we want to make that clear on the roadmap when we're doing that. And then the same thing here when you're talking about, well, what do you mean by reduce risk with service graph connectors? You're able to click into that, have that same conversation like we did before, but instead of going back to the capability map, you go back to the roadmap. And so what we want to do is we want to sequence the features here so that we're getting the most value out of ITOM as possible, whether it's to reduce cost, decrease risk, sustain growth, or when I go into organizations, I talk to them specifically about their goals. So I'm working with Kevin and his organization, and his CIO gave us some very specific initiatives that we have to be attaching to if we want to push forward with some of the work. The stuff on the right here I provided, these are outcomes that are industry standard, that when people purchase things like ITOM, right, they're able to drive to those metrics. If you want to see a full list of there's also a link here. So there's a lot of little links in here and a lot of information on this one slide. So if you click on outcomes, it's going to bring you to a list of all the outcomes of ITOM. So these are some of the ones that we use that are what our product teams actually drive to. Our product teams can't build product unless they're able to create value for our customers. So this exposes you to those value statements a little bit so that you can get an idea of how you're going to communicate back to your organization, how you're driving value with ITOM. Let me check if there's any questions in the chat.
Hey, John,
Kevin,
can
I don't know
ask
if-
you a question?
Sure.
Sometimes on the labeling, so is your success metrics and your suggested improvements objective is success metrics and key results are suggested improvements? If I
Yeah,
was doing OKRs?
Yes. Yeah, we'll try to
Perfect.
put some numbers in there to give you a kind of a starting point.
No, I love this because then you can back it all the way back up to the strategic plan and you can move it down when you're doing your initiatives and planning those. So you have an end-to-end mapping.
A lot of times, especially in ITOM, because it's so technical that a lot of times we forget that we are driving value for the business first and foremost, right? And if we're not doing that, you probably need to rethink what we're doing. So these are always good to tie back and revisit as you go through your ITOM project.
If I could just add to, one of the things we see a lot is customers will take on these CMDB initiatives and they'll feel like weird science projects, right? These internal initiatives that they can't quite pinpoint what they're trying to do, what the outcomes are. They just want an inventory of everything. Well, doing it this way and having your outcomes up front will tie those to your strategic imperatives. And suddenly it's not just a skunksworks, internal effort. It's an actual business imperative that we do this, right? And you can get the kind of bigger stakeholders to have skin in the game so that you're not fighting an uphill battle when you're trying to build out your CMDB.
Thanks, Roland.
This is
And Kevin, is this a lot what you guys are driving towards in your organization? You've been running ITOM for what, about 4 years now?
No, even longer. And actually what Roland said rings so true for us because I want to say maybe 6 or 7 years ago, horizontal discovery was just turned on. just to use essentially as like a repository of like what does the landscape of our architecture, like of our infrastructure look like at the organization. But it wasn't really running any business processes or handling any business need beyond if somebody were interested, they could go poke around, right? And there's been some maturity since that time, in my opinion, some slow going maturity that part of the reason why we need your help with it. But you know, to integrate our actual processes and infrastructure teams into utilizing the information that's like at your fingertips when you're using both top down and horizontal. So Roland, what you said is like exactly what somebody made the decision years ago, right? Of just kind of turning that on, dumping it in there. Now we have 2 million CIs to manage, right? So it's been frustrating to try and like right the ship because it's now this massive ship. So.
And what parts are you using today? Just to be clear, maybe you can tell us a little bit about you, Kevin, and then go into what parts you're using a little bit.
Yeah. So my name's Kevin Newton. I'm the platform owner at CalPERS, which for anyone not in California, it's a state agency. So on the government side. And we are currently working with John and his team in engagements that they do to help, you know, realize value from the platform. The engagement he's doing with us isn't just ITOM related, but ITOM is a big part of that picture, and trying to get some maturity and realize value out of what we have and really the order of operations of what we should implement to get us to where we need to be. You know, John asked me to talk today just a little bit, mainly about our OCM, like organizational change management perspective, and the voices kind of that we have adding to the picture at our organization. And really just to kind of simplify it down, it's broken into 3 main teams that are involved in the process of trying to implement or enact change in some way in the ITOM environment in ServiceNow. The first team is my team. It's the core platform team. We're in one of our IT divisions that's all about application development. And then there's a second team, a small team in our infrastructure area that are the boots on the ground people. They're the ones, and just to answer your question with this part of it, John, they're the ones doing discovery schedules. They're using service mapping. Right now, it's somewhat in its infancy. And they've done some discovery-based mapping, and I know there's other options there. I think I even saw it on one of your previous slides, right, about using tag-based or something else instead. But right now we're starting to map our application landscape by using entry points and discovery in that regard, and that second team is doing that. And then we have a third team that's in kind of like a third IT division, that's the business administration side, and they're running the policy, governance, and like design aspects of both software asset management and configuration management. And no change to the ITOM space really moves forward without kind of some sort of consultative approval or technical delivery aspect from all 3 of those teams at once. Which has its benefits in that the structure within our IT environment at my organization is 3 main IT divisions. And so we have representation from all 3 IT divisions when it comes to utilizing the ITOM space. But at the same time, the pain points are that every division has its own shifting objectives and timeframes and whatnot, and getting all 3 teams on board for continuous improvement efforts in that space can be difficult. It's almost like too many cooks in that situation where we're waiting. You know, 1 or 2 teams may be available or have bandwidth to help mature, but now we're waiting for the 3rd team that's maybe got some other higher priority project assigned from their leadership. And so we run into like kind of a waiting game until everybody's ready to proceed and discuss and enact change. So that's really kind of been a little bit of a problem. And then
what are some of the things in there that they're so is it different maturity levels? Like you have the team 1 might be at a maturity 1, and they might be at a maturity 3. You're working on different things. Is that
if by maturity you mean kind of capability? within the platform, like the understanding of utilization and whatever, then yeah, I think that's an issue. And really, again, it's been because our organization shifts, there's political reasons why certain teams pick up certain work and all sorts of things that I don't want to bore everyone here with today, but like the discovery and the CMDB administration team are new at that role compared to our core platform team, who's that unit, although people come and go from it, that team's been handling the core platform deliverables for the entire 10 years that we've had ServiceNow.
And then you do have a governance across all these, right? Like there's a governance paper.
There, and that third team I mentioned are writing the documentation, the governance and whatnot. And really, again, another pain point I was about to speak to was that the governance team is large and robust, and they spend a lot of time. So we end up with a lot of paperwork, documentation, et cetera, on how things should be without the resources to get us to that point, right? So we really, I'd like, as an outcome of all this, to be able to kind of convey to our senior leadership the need for a shift, for there to be more of a focus on the day-to-day, not even day-to-day deliverables, but the actual technical deliverables that need to happen in the tool. Things like triaging discovery schedules, entry points for application service maps, and triaging any firewall issues with that. Reviewing the CMDB health dashboard for problems, deduplication tasks, that sort of thing. Like those are, I don't want to say being abandoned, but they don't have the necessary bandwidth to accomplish that for the size of the CMDB that we have. So we've got all these people talking about how much they'd love it to look a certain way, which is great because there's interest, but there's not enough people doing it. So I think that's really a bit the crux of our issue right now.
Sounds like you get a lot of people. It's just that they're maybe not organized the right way to get the most out of it, right?
Yeah, and it just comes down to, like, especially when you're a public agency, right? Like the structure of who reports to who and what assignments are siloed to different areas, right? I feel like probably at a private agency, someone could just go, you 3 people over there, help with them, right? It's not really the way that the state of California works. We have duty statements that you adhere to specific tasks that are related to your responsibilities, and there's delays in shifting people, right, from one assignment to the next, that sort of thing. So you run into those problems.
Yep. It's good that all 3 groups are pushing forward at their own rates, right? That you're basically a service that provides ITOM discovery and service mapping to other teams. So you're kind of brokering the services essentially.
Yeah, I didn't really talk about my team's role in that so much. And really we are, I mean, platform owner over all the features within ServiceNow, right? We're kind of the primary gatekeepers, establishing, like helping establish the actual like ACL provisioning so that people can accomplish their roles. Sometimes it's out of the box. Sometimes we're building custom because what we need for our org, right, is it's not what ServiceNow offers out of the box. They've got a framework for, establishing custom permissions, that sort of thing. But we are relatively hands-off in the ITOM space, other than ensuring that those 2 teams have the access they need to perform their work, and that what they're doing is not going to be of impact to the other services that are our responsibility, which is why our role is more consultative than anything else.
And I think we had a question from Edward. Edward, did you have your hand?
I did. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I'm good.
Fantastic. John, again, always as always, nice to see you. Kevin, thanks a lot for the overview. My question is, CalPERS the centralized entity for the deployment of ServiceNow? Are you one of just several agencies that are deploying it? Because it sounded like you are the platform owner for the state, but I think I'm hearing it, you're one of the agencies. So I'm a little bit confused on how ServiceNow is managed there.
Yeah, so there are state agencies, and John may know this landscape too, but there are state agencies. There's one called like Department of Technology, right? And they deliver technology services out to all the other state agencies. But beyond Department of Technology, every other agency is kind of on its own to do the things it needs to do. So our instances are specifically about processes and deliverables for CalPERS employees, and soon to be potentially CalPERS members and retirees. We may end up expanding into that space, but it is CalPERS focused, which is one singular state agency.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
California's big, so their departments sometimes are as big as agencies in some other states. The departments within the agencies, right?
We have about 3,000 employees at my state agency, and we're not the largest, but we are well funded. So we've got the money to spend, I guess.
Cool. Any other questions for Kevin? I think I like having Kevin on because I think his story is the same as a lot of you. You're a lot of platform owners and you're juggling multiple balls, right? Trying to keep different teams happy with this because they all have different approaches. They all had different asset management programs and discovery programs before, different tools in there, right? So it's kind of comes back to what we talked about a few weeks ago. How do we get the tool chain under control so that everybody's not doing something different, right? We're trying to share, but there's friction in trying to get to that, right? Where you're trying to share this common function across the teams. All right. There's no other questions. Well, Roland, I think you were going to just share, right? Because you had your own slides.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So I know you had some different topics. I wanted to bring up this org topic because this is one that's usually kind of the underlying challenges that we're all facing, right? So now I think we can go into some of Roland's topics, which is more as, he goes in and helps organizations through some of these things. I help with the governance part. Roland helps more with the technical part. So
Yeah.
I think that's accurate, right, Roland?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I kind of all over the board. Oftentimes, I'll meet with customers who are, just newly having purchased ITOM, so they're trying to get their start. Maybe they've got a partner involved. They're just looking for some guidelines. Other times, it's maybe going off the rails, or they're trying to get it back on the rails. All across the board. Some are just very successful. They want to make sure that they're getting the best out of their CMDB investment, that kind of thing. Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I can. You want me to go ahead and take over, John, and share?
Yeah. And if there's any other questions for Kevin, if I know, Kevin, you got to leave in the next 5 minutes, but if there's anything on chat for you, if you could just keep an eye on that.
I'm actually responding right now because I liked what someone had to say, and like
awesome.
what they're talking about is what I'd like to move to. It's just hard to get by on. And just to clue everyone in, they were saying essentially they have like a council, like a center of excellence, almost right experience where they run all those like by a larger stakeholdership within the organization. And right now our framework is really, it's my platform team working with the like feature and application owners directly. And it's really more of a two-way partnership between the people operating in whatever space in the platform and us, rather than a larger group of everyone impacted or representation from everybody saying yay or nay to certain things, right? And it really comes down to like, I get the bad rap when I have to tell people no alone, right? If they're doing something that puts the platform in kind of an unhealthy space, rather than like a larger group of representatives all being like, yeah, I don't think that really delivers value or whatever, right? So my team's on their own a lot to deliver that. And then someone else had a question. Yeah, it was CalPERS. Simple question. Yeah, California. It's their pension and health, like for public employees. We handle all that stuff for them in case people don't know. But I do need to leave, like John said. So thanks for everyone's time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate your insight on that.
Thank you.
All right, now you can take over, Roland. Sorry.
Sorry, I was on mute. Give me 1 second. I'm just sharing my screen now.
All right.
All right, are you all seeing my presentation? I think you are. Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so for those who don't know me, my name is Roland Beaucage. I'm a service operations solutions consultant for state and local government and higher education. John did a great job kind of describing some of the things that I work on. But today, when John asked for me to come present today, I thought about the different topics that would be most relevant to this group. I know, I've been part of the Digital Services Forum for just under a year now, and I've gotten to kind of hear the topics that y'all discuss, and I think this particular piece of ITOM, which is service mapping, is something that should resonate, particularly as we think about like the CSDM and being able to sort of bridge the gap between all the many CIs that we might have in our CMDB, and being able to connect the dots on what those CIs do from an application functionality standpoint, which then allows us to go on and start speaking the language of business a little bit more than just systems, right? So being able to say application X production is consistent of these different servers, these different network infrastructure appliances, et cetera, is really what service mapping does. And unfortunately, as I talk to customers, one of the things that I see far too often is service mapping of all the different ITOM features and functionality. Service mapping tends to be where people get stuck the most, or they've sort of put it on the back burner, or they sort of get around to it when they get around to it, which means never in a lot of cases. And so it's unfortunate because, in my personal opinion, it's one of the most powerful pieces of the sort of ITOM toolkit that you get with your ITOM subscription. And you know, where I feel like a lot of customers go wrong too is they worry about, you know, what the output will be as opposed to the outcome, right? They're thinking more in terms of, wouldn't it be nice if I had all this information? We'll figure out what we'll do with it later, but let's go get it, right? And so they don't necessarily have very specific measurable goals or specific measurable outcomes. So it's difficult for them to say, you know, who's going to be the primary stakeholder in achieving this outcome, right? And so these exercises become like a, you know, a behind the scenes project as opposed to a real, like, you know, initiative that has a lot of teeth to it, where you get a lot of momentum and people, you know, playing their part and have a lot of skin in the game from the different teams that need to participate in this kind of an exercise. The other thing that I see a lot is a lot of folks have highly customized applications, and they try to do service mapping and they just have a really tough time, either because in ServiceNow we don't have patterns for these highly customized apps. And you know, they need to get the engagement of their application teams, and so it just becomes a very tedious thing for them. So what I want to do today is I want to try to sort of break and demystify what service mapping is. And there are a lot of, I would say, low-hanging fruit kind of layup ways of getting that done, as opposed to having to sort of, you know, throw your head against the wall over and over again, trying to map these complex applications with your app owners and everyone involved. There are sort of the Cliff Notes versions of service maps that you can get done through tag-based mapping and other sources, which or other methods, and I'll go over that here today. I am suffering from a pretty bad cold, so from time to time, if I have to mute and cough my lungs out, that's just part of the show. Please bear with me. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but I feel it coming. So the common mistakes that I see, or the common misconceptions I see, is oftentimes customers will wait to map their applications until the discovery is complete, right? So they'll say, hey, I have these sort of blind spots in my network where I'm not discovering CIs, certain types of devices I'm not able to populate into my CMDB. So I'm going to wait to do service mapping. And that's probably one of the worst things you could do, frankly, because a lot of the times when we talk to customers, what we'll find out is, hey, those areas of your CMDB that are a bit incomplete, is there a reason why? Are those like subnets that you can't get to? Is that where your most critical infrastructure is? Is that where your applications are? And we find out that more often than not, the answer is no. In fact, they could have gotten great value out of mapping those applications, but instead they opted to wait, or they deferred it, for whatever different reason, right? And then the other kind of polar opposite extreme that I see is folks who take on service mapping efforts where they feel like in order to be successful, they have to map every single thing in their entire estate. And that's another kind of misconception. We would love to have everything mapped, but there are just certain applications that frankly aren't important enough or may not be worth your time to map. I would say, like, these efforts need to be done with a layer of practicality, right? A layer of what is the outcome, what are we trying to achieve, and making sure that you hold that as your true north as you're going through these efforts. And then the misconceptions that I see a lot, if you're not familiar with top-down mapping, we're going to go over that here today. Top-down service maps are the only good option. That's not true. There's some really great other easier methods of getting this done. This will require significant internal resource time. It can, but it doesn't have to, and we're going to talk about that as well. Service maps are not that important. We can live without them. There's a lot of things in the world that you can live without. Doesn't mean you should. And so I think after what you see today, you'll kind of have a better sense of why that doesn't have to be the case and why you can absolutely map your applications in your environment. And then I've done discovery. Isn't that the same as service mapping? No. And we'll talk about what the differences are between doing a CMDB discovery versus going on to then map the services in the CMDB. So I think for this audience, I mean, I know you all often work with some of our other products like SPM and maybe EA or formerly APM, some of our other kind of portfolio-driven products where you're trying to have a kind of a top-down strategic view of all your different application services and your various digital products that that you're building and that you're governing as an organization. But often what I'll see is customers who don't do service maps will ultimately have this sort of valley in the middle of their overall CSDM, right? Where you know, they'll have CIs, they'll have some discovery done, they'll have a CMDB, but they won't necessarily be able to tie what those CIs do to the, you know, in terms of what applications are being served by them. And so that sort of rift always creates this gap in between what's happening at the lowest possible level versus what you're building sort of top down. So what I like to tell folks is that, you know, the service maps are essentially the way of taking that sort of bottoms up approach and having it meet in the middle with the top down efforts that you're doing to build out your various business applications, business service offerings, technical service offerings, et cetera, and make sure that you can really go all the way from the top to the bottom and get to the CI level to do more advanced things. So the difference between discovery and service mapping, it really is just the difference between having existential awareness, what exists in my environment, what's on those systems that I have in my environment, software, running processes, maybe some of the connections that I'm making system to system. And that helps me when I do discovery, it helps me understand what some of the sort of foundational dependencies are between some of my systems. So I could use that to help me do change planning, right? I could see that server A talks to server B. I could see that that load balancer has these various servers, real server IPs beneath it. So I could start to draw some conclusions about what this change might do in terms of impacting some of my downstream systems. But it is a very infrastructure sort of centric view in the sense that I see TCP connections, I see application services running, but I can't really figure out why until I do a service map. And so the big distinguishing difference between a service map and discovery, doing service mapping versus doing discovery, is I'm getting application context. I'm answering for the why does this server need to exist? Why do these systems talk to one another? Why do I see this software installed on that server? What is the bigger picture view of the significance of that particular system? And so what I'm showing you on this slide toward the far right is this is sort of that ITOM journey where we talk about monitoring and alerting, event management, and some of those higher end use cases for why that data is valuable. But you could just as easily replace what I show in this sort of purple column here with other outcomes, like maybe I want to do vulnerability management and I'd like to prioritize those vulnerabilities in such a way where I know what applications they affect and I can schedule my vulnerability remediation with the application owner right away, right? Rather than having to depend on tribal knowledge. You know, when you've ever worked in this kind of world, usually you get a list of vulnerabilities on your systems and they're all servers or network infrastructure. And you now have to be the decoder ring to go back to your app teams and say, hey, can I patch this tonight? When can I patch this? Meanwhile, your security team wants it patched immediately, right? So that just being able to have intelligent conversations about what's impacted and when we can get these remediated allows for a smoother conversation, and it allows you to meet your SLOs, SLAs, right, down the vulnerability path. And that's just one example. Another one could be like, I want to make sure my disaster recovery production site has all the my DR site has all the appropriate infrastructure to have a one-for-one replication, right? I want to make sure that my DR plan is going to work when I do my DR test, this kind of thing. So ultimately, what we're accomplishing with service maps really is kind of the sky's the limit. But what I'm showing on the screen is kind of that traditional ITOM track of doing monitoring and alerting, just as an example. I'm going to stop for a minute. Are there any questions?
I have a question. Describe your challenges with, you made a comment earlier about the adoption and why people won't adopt it. I've been around for around 10 years doing this, and I can tell you for a fact, the biggest problem that I've seen with service mapping is the credential issue. It's always such a freaking pain in the neck to try to go, get the cred. Even if you have all the creds running for discovery, the creds for service mapping, the load balancer service is a much bigger deal.
Yeah, and that's one of the many challenges, right? Yeah, there's also like the engagement layer with the application teams. When you do a service mapping exercise, you need their input, right? You can't just do it sort of on your own. And what I'm going to talk about here in a minute gives a few kind of tips and tricks of other alternative ways of doing it rather than needing that full set of credentials. But with the top-down mapping approach, which is kind of what most people understand to be the service map, but there are other alternative approaches as well, which I'm going to get to here in a minute. But with that approach, you do need full system access. You do need to have an application pattern. In terms of like where the executables were installed, what running processes are out there. They need to be highly like recognizable for us to be able to pick them up. So a lot of folks run into issues. Maybe they have highly customized apps. Maybe they don't use consumer off-the-shelf apps, or they don't have very many. And so the act of mapping them becomes quite a challenge, right? Does that resonate? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and a follow-up question, how would you approach it? I think the answer is a hybrid approach, but when you already have your business apps in the portfolio consuming all your app services, whether those app services are dynamic CI groups or app services that you've set up, you've mapped them, each business app to consume whatever your flavor is, Deb, Test Prod, or Northwest, Southeast.
Mhm.
And then you do service mapping, and it's providing the very similar connection, if you will, or relationship between the service map and the business app. But now you have two. You have your existing app service that has that relationship, and then you have the service map relationship. So they're redundant when they're sitting side by side. So how do you approach that? Do you just say, oh, I get better results for vertical, so I'll remove the horizontal that I've added? How do you do that?
Yeah, and it's a great point, right? You don't want to have duplicate application services, right? Because then it's just like, here's the one that the infrastructure team loves, and here's the one that everybody else who's doing enterprise architecture cares about, right? And that can create a rift. It's really a determination of, am I doing this greenfield or brownfield? In your case, it sounds like you've built up quite a bit of the application services and built those relationships up to their respective other elements of the CSDM. In fact, while I'm at it, let me just pivot over to the CSDM slide here. But what we really want to do is we want to make sure that application service that we're binding those CIs to is a single application service, right? Maybe you have a prod, dev, stage, test environment. Okay, those are different versions of that application service, right? So different infrastructure is going to be bound to those when you do a service map. But I think the key there is, as you enter into a service mapping exercise, you need to kind of answer the first question of, does the application service already exist? Am I mapping an application to an existing application service, or am I creating a new one as I build my map? And then once you've done that, right, as you're going through an application mapping exercise, those are kind of some of those key decisions you need to understand before you pull the trigger on something like this.
I would just say that it also has impacts downstream, like the TPM discovered technologies table. Will it be impacted, right? Because that's pulling in all your app services, relating the software, for example, to the business apps in that table. So if you change them, I don't know the impact of that table when it looks at an app service, a service map app service versus say a dynamic CI group with a CMDB group relationship.
Yeah, it'll create a mapped application record that then binds up to the application service. So there's a sort of like a middle layer in between to help with that kind of thing. But it's not the point though is, if you end up with double application services, you might have history on the old application service you want to preserve, and so you got to figure out then, okay, what am I doing? Am I going to merge this or not? Right?
Yeah.
So you're right. Getting it right the first time is important, but I don't want that to also sound like, oh wow, we better not do this. We got to spend hours on kind of pulling our hair and making sure we don't mess anything up. It's more a matter of like making sure that you have a strategy in place, you know what exists already, and that you're mapping to what exists or mapping, building a new application service as part of this exercise.
Yeah, plus all your incidents problem changes that are using the CI as the app service, they get, if you change it to a service map, and then you have all that historical data you got to deal with some way.
Yeah. Edward, you had a question? Oops, sorry. I moved ahead.
Do you have any examples where you discovered duplicate application services as a result of this mapping exercises and ultimately decommissioning one resulting in significant savings? Any sort of testimonials around this sort of aha moment by going through this exercise?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't have one queued, right? But I know that, so before I joined ServiceNow, I was a customer, and the ability to start an application rationalization effort, right, based on seeing all the different systems that are out there and taking on these app rat type, efforts. We were migrating about 200 or so applications to the cloud, right? And we wanted to be able to understand, like, what does the before picture look like, so that we can better ensure that our migration efforts would meet our reference architectures that we were building as part of this exercise, right? So for us, the ability to see what was there before and then use that to help determine what is the landing zone that this application needs to be in if we're going to re-platform or refactor this application, was kind of where the service maps made the best outcome and made the most sense for us. If for example, one of our efforts was we wanted to get off of Oracle, right? So we said we're gonna move all of our Oracle databases to PostgreSQL wherever we can, right? That was one of our reference architectures. So if I know what all is the sort of composition of my applications, I can go now and say, well, rather than looking at a laundry list of infrastructure server names and some general like SQL Server and Oracle Server type information, which is useful, but not as useful as knowing what applications are those serving. It allowed me to be able to properly disposition them. But we can obviously like pull a customer reference, or if you have an interest in having a conversation with a customer, we can also coordinate that. Just obviously work with your account team, and that kind of thing can be queued up. Yeah, thanks, Edward. David.
I just had a process question. You were talking about cloud migration,
Yeah.
and my organization has gotten into the habit of creating single node service maps, single node application services that are SaaS based or what have you, and they're using them more as a point of reference than actually like the intended purpose of an application map showing like the operational equipment or whatever that backs up that service. I was wondering, like, we're thinking about, is that the best way to do it? Is there a better way to handle those types of applications rather than having a service map for them? And I was wondering what your experience as far as that would be concerned is.
Yeah. It sort of depends. Some of these SaaS apps have on-premise or inside your network devices that sort of support the running of it. Even ServiceNow, we do as well. We have the mid servers, right? So what I've typically seen done in that case is depending on how much access you have to those systems on-prem, assuming there are systems on-prem, we'll typically go ahead and do a service map and bind that to the sort of placeholder SaaS application service that was built, right? And that works okay. That's fine. You could also do like a dynamic CI group, and I'm going to talk about those here in a minute, but you could do a dynamic CI group where anything with a particular server name or anything with a particular executable installed or a running process that meets this criteria makes its way into the group, right? But it just sort of depends on what that application sort of composition is, how it's hosted. Do you have access to the operating system? Those are some of those key decisions that, whether it be a SaaS app or an on-premise app or anything in between, those are going to determine the best approach to sort of navigate it. I don't know that I've answered your question as head on as I would like, but I'm hoping that resonates to some extent.
It does, and some of that makes sense with what we're doing. It's just the ones that we have governance around our service maps, basically having service owners like review and what have you, and we have those single node maps into that governance, and it seems like we're adding administrative red tape around that process for things that maybe don't need to be governed or what have you. So we were wondering if there was a better way to represent those applications without actually having them be a service map. But what you said makes sense. And we do have some that, like you were said, have on-prem stuff that tie in or what have you. But we have a bunch that are just the service, and that's it.
Yeah, the guiding light is, if I have the mapping of the CIs to the application, think about what you want to get as an outcome of that, right? If I want to be able to plan my changes better, and I want to be able to have the app owner weigh in on a patching of a server, right? I want to bring it up from that infrastructure layer to that app layer. That's really the outcome, right? That's what we're going for. So it's sort of, I hate to say it depends. It just depends, right? But if you're governing and you want to be able to oversee these applications and have representation of application services, whether they be hosted in your network or SaaS based, you're going to want that representation there in some way, right? That's going to feed your SPM, your EA, your various kind of portfolio management effort.
Thank you.
And Jason, I'm going to take your question next, and then I'm gonna run out of time real quick. So I'm gonna after your question, I'm gonna ask folks to hold it just a bit, and then I'm gonna jump through my slides. Jason, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. Here we have a work in higher ed, so we have a student information system,
Sure.
and we have a tie to an application service, but we also have like several sub prod instances of this student information system that we get a lot of tickets on. So I've added application servers for all the sub prod instances. Is that the right way to do it? Because I've also seen it diagrammed where they have those as technical service offerings. I wasn't sure what the best practice was for handling that.
Yeah, my personal opinion of it is that it deserves its place as an application service, just as a sub prod. I've seen it done both ways. It's just that if you're reporting on application services, and if you're trying to understand like the total cost of ownership of some of these services, they don't have it represented at the application service layer, I feel like you might miss out, right? Because you're missing a piece of that puzzle. So my personal opinion is that it should be there, although I've seen people get by just fine the other way too.
Okay.
But yeah, the way I've done it is to have application service prod, application service dev, test, that kind of thing.
Okay, that's what we did. Good. I feel better. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let me jump through. I'm going to run short on time. I want to talk about tag-based mapping. This is that sort of layup, easy, maybe good enough map that I was referring to earlier. That's here at the top, where most people end up spending way too much of their time and they get stuck as they try to do top-down service maps. If you know anything about tags, you know that they're typically in like your AWS, Azure, GCP, or your cloud service providers environments. A lot of folks will also do tagging in their VMware on-premise environments too. The first thing people tell me though, when they say, "Oh, tag-based maps," my tags are terrible. We don't have governance over our tags, these kinds of things. You might be surprised how simple it is to do a tag-based map. And because ultimately all we really need are two tags to be relatively correct. One of them is the application name, and the other one is the environment. So production, dev, stage, test, right? These kinds of things. And if you're on one of our ITOM visibility sort of modern day SKUs, the same SKU that entitles you to service mapping also entitles you to a product called tag governance. You heard John, or you saw John show that product in the slide earlier, right? So we have the ability to also help you manage those tags, but we're not looking for this utopian paradise of having all your tags perfect, right? There's going to be certain tags like your chargeback, your cost centers, those things that are irrelevant to the conversation of doing a service map that we just don't care about. Again, it's two particular fields, application and environment. If we can get those tags correct, you can in one fell swoop map all of your applications. You may not want to do it in one fell swoop, but you have the ability to. And so for organizations that are struggling to map their applications and they really want their CMDB to have application context, this could be the cheat code that gets you at least started with a really foundationally great application context in your CMDB. And then you can always go, assuming you have access to all the systems, if you really want a surgically precise layered map, you can do a top-down map later, assuming you can get to all of those components. Some folks will do a tag-based map and never look back. They're content with that. And I'll show you an illustration of that on the next slide. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to try to bang through these quickly. The other is a dynamic CI group. some of you may be familiar with this, but it's basically like a query-based, group me together all of these CIs based on certain attributes of the CI. Could be the name of the host, could be something that's running on the host, these kinds of things. And so as we think about change planning or vulnerability management or disaster recovery, if I have the ability to show that server X is a member of this application, I have the groundwork to do a lot of really great things with that information. So on the right-hand side here, this is a top-down map. You'll see it's very pretty. It's very layered. It has a lot of context, right? And you can see all the different services running. If you're not familiar with machine learning based, this is meant to assist you with your top-down mapping, where we, as part of discovery, we picked up certain patterns and we recognize them, and we think we have a good candidate to map here. So that could help you with a top-down mapping exercise. But where I want to focus is right here on the tag-based. And so as you'll see in this approach, it's not as pretty, right? It's a pretty flat map. But what it's doing is it's giving you insight as to which systems are part of which application, which is more often than not really what you want. I'm someone who would love to have all of my systems top-down mapped, but if I could get to a place where the tags are doing the job enough for me to be successful, that's a really great way of getting it done, right? And so this is basically like running a query and saying, hey, any application with application name X in the tags, and it's production or it's dev or it's stage, whichever environment, make sure that that makes it into this map, right? And so if I'm getting alerts, or if I want to open an incident, or I want to plan a change, now I can make sure that the application owner is clued in, and we can detect conflicts in those changes as they're scheduled, because we know that that system is part of this particular application. And this is just a shameless plug. We have various customer workshops that we do throughout the year. And one of the ones that we have out there takes you through a lab guide where we actually, and this is literally a screenshot from that lab guide, where we build a tag-based service family based on the application and the environment. And then we go out and we click on this button here. I'm not sure if it's easy to see on your screen, but it says View Service Candidates. And then you'll see it goes out and it looks at everything in my cloud tenant, and it says, here are all your different applications. And in the exercise, we go on and we map SharePoint, we map Tableau, right? Those are the ones we pick in the exercise. But there's nothing that stops me from going down this laundry list and clicking check all the check boxes and doing it in one shot. It's also a very quick and dirty way to see if I have any inconsistencies in my application names too. So if you want to get a sense of what's out there, you don't have to complete the exercise. You could very quickly see all the different applications based on their name, and then see if there's any deviations, anything that looks incorrect to you. But there's nothing that should stop you from moving forward and doing that, assuming you can see these tags and you're discovering these systems. And I think I beat these topics to death already, but change outcomes, understanding, as I plan my change, whether or not I'm about to take down a mission critical application in the middle of the night for something that I thought was a benign change, right? That's one of those outcomes. Streamlining AI ops, being able to say, hey, we got an alert from server X. Is that a doomsday event? Is that a drop everything and open up a war room bridge? Or is that an issue that I can afford to, leave, as a medium priority, or whatever the case may be, right? And so what we're doing in that AI ops or event management space is we're taking those individual application services. We're also taking dynamic CI groups, right? And we're using those to be able to say, hey, you know what, my most critical application of them, one of them is red. That's probably where I should prioritize my efforts here today. And so if I'm someone at the service desk and I see that one of these critical apps is red, it gives me indication that maybe I should plan on putting an abandoned message up. Maybe I should plan on having an influx of calls, right? And that way we're all sort of playing from that same sheet of music. And then down the mapping path, this is not a tag-based map, unfortunately, but the same kind of logic applies, whether it's a tag-based map or a top-down map that we're seeing here, but overlaying the map with where we're seeing the alarms coming in, the critical alerts, so that we sort of know where's the bad, where's the red, right? That's really allowing our sort of first line responders, or maybe you have a NOC team, maybe you have a first level triage group, or an SRM team, something like this. They know where to focus their efforts. They know who to call. They know what their options are to resolve this, rather than trying to swivel chair between a bunch of different monitoring tools. And then similar here, prioritizing vulnerability response by the application. We have this many vulnerabilities on these applications, right? Giving us more ability to prioritize. Where's the most sensitive data, right? Is my e-commerce environment the one that has the sensitive data? Probably. Let's go ahead and make sure that gets patched tonight versus maybe my visitor management application can go a day or two, right? Having that conversation intelligently rather than just looking at a laundry list of servers is really what we're afforded by that service mapping capability. And then I think I talked to this already, but you know, your SPM efforts, right? Your project portfolio management, your APM. There's a rift there, right, between the CIs and the bigger picture stuff, right? So that service mapping is that layer in between. And then if you're doing a technology portfolio management effort, all the different elements of that application, including the hardware, right? So an ITAM effort, the software that's installed on it, and then being able to draw that up to what is that application that we're affecting here, and assigning risk based on what we now know about that infrastructure and what role it plays in the application is really what we're accomplishing. So I promise that's my last slide. I appreciate y'all sticking through it with me. I know we're up at time. Any last, I'm going to open up for questions. We've only got a couple minutes. I can stay back if anyone wants to ask. Otherwise, I appreciate everyone's time here today. And I'll just open up for questions. Any questions from the team?
Yeah, I just have another one. The diagram you showed had the dynamic CI groups associated to the technical service offering, but what is the risk of having the dynamic CI groups, as you explained in later slides, associated with both, right? The technical service offerings and the business service offerings.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, we want the application service to be, you know, the sort of final stopping point for anything related to CIs. We don't want the CIs to be bound directly to the business applications or the business services or anything along those lines. We want to anchor everything and channel it through that application service to be CSDM compliant, to be in adherence with that. I've seen some customers make the mistake, though, of binding their CIs either via service maps or via dynamic CI groups directly to their business services. And this unfortunately creates a problem for them, right? Because once you go down that path, now you've got all your history built up that way of incidents, problems, changes, things that you've scheduled, alerts, these kinds of things. Maybe you've built KPI reporting, SLOs, SLAs on these things. And so now to back it out, it's surgery, right? So we want to really try to keep that bound at that application service layer. Let me see if I can get back to that slide. Apologies. But I definitely wouldn't say that it's good practice to take these and have them bleed out into anything that you see over here on that right-hand side. Does that help?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yep.
I do have a question, if you're able to stay.
Sure, yeah, I'm free, yes, absolutely.
Also, the workshop you mentioned earlier, how do we access that or get that? Or...
Yeah,
I was gonna ask that as well. That tag-based workshop, I would love to get a link to that because I would have some people on my team that'd like to do that with me.
Yeah, I'll take the action after this session to post a link. We have all of our ITOM workshops on a site. It shows you all the different ones that are scheduled out there. I think now we've got them scheduled out through March, but they're always adding more. So I'll post a link in the DSF forum site. But if you see that, if you go to that and you see one that you can go to, great. If one isn't there, maybe it's not in your city, something like this, stay tuned, visit it periodically because they're constantly adding more to that. But yeah, it's a one-day workshop. They take you through the various different ITOM visibility sort of talk track, right? So how to best practices for discovery, best practices for service mapping. I'll get you a link to that after we're done.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something else too that I'll offer up. That same slide where I had the view service candidates and the laundry list of candidates, that came from the lab from that session. I took the lab guide and I actually just scrubbed it up and got it down to the bare bones of the steps that you take to actually do this. So I figured I'd post that in DSF as well because it's almost like a handbook guide. Maybe try this in a lower environment or something like that, and you can kind of get a sense of it too. But that might also help you out. Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, perfect. Well, everyone, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it, and look forward to talking soon. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay, Roland, my question.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Hi, I'm from the University of North Florida. We only have a 3-man team for our platform. I am the CMDB administrator. So I took on the weight of learning it first off, and now for the last year, and now I'm implementing.
Sure.
So I'm want to get clarification on what you said about, or whoever said it, about not waiting to do service mapping.
Yeah.
Because I'm just starting down the road of CSDM with services.
Sure. Okay.
Service focused kind of approach to the implementation. We're working on crawl walk. We have basically have foundation, but we're working on crawl walk. So I was going to go through each department, see what they have using the lexicon and or something like it from one of the presentations, and that was going to be my approach. And I was going to do service mapping later.
Sure.
So right now I'm doing, I've already done discovery on the EUCs. Well, not discovery. We're using service graph connectors, SCCM, Intune, Jamf for the EUCs. And now I'm running discovery on the servers, the infrastructure servers.
Okay.
So I know that okay. So when's a good time to bring in service mapping? Once I get the servers and I recognize ones that are actually application services.
Yeah. So what I would say is typically a discovery effort, a good place to start in any of those is to try to get as best as possible. This information isn't always as easy to get as you would like, or as thorough as you would like, but a list of subnets. Tell me the subnets that are in my data center. Tell me which of them have applications in them, and give me a sense of the network landscape, so that as I do my discovery, even if I'm using a service graph connector, maybe I'm not necessarily doing ServiceNow discovery and scanning these environments, but I certainly want to know, have some litmus test that tells me, am I getting everything that I should be getting, right? Typically that subnet list and what should generally be in them is a great place to start. And it could actually serve as a little bit of a project program sort of milestone list for you as you're doing these exercises to make sure, okay, I'm seeing about, what I would come to expect for this /24 subnet that's inside of my data center. I'm seeing the servers, I'm seeing the network infrastructure. I have a good, I'm not getting a lot of errors, or maybe I have no errors in discovering those. Those should give you like kind of a warm fuzzy that subnet, that data center network, whatever it is, and I'm oversimplifying like crazy here, but that I have the majority of the systems that are coming in cleanly, and that I've looked at the error logs, I've troubleshot those, I've gotten to a place where I have comfort knowing that it's there. What typically happens is a lot of customers either don't have that list, right? So they don't have that sheet, they won't have that guidance. So they'll typically just sort of feel around and try to get whatever they can get. But that can cause you to kind of have this we're never done, kind of a feeling, right? And you never really know what good looks like because of it. So if you can, typically a network team might have an IP address management tool like an Infoblox or something like this, where they could spell out what their server subnets are, what their network management IP ranges are, this kind of thing. And that should give you the ability to then compare that to your discovered devices. And if you're running our discovery, you'll see the errors and these kinds of things. And then you can get a sense of, am I comfortable enough now to know that my systems are there, sufficient enough for me to start doing some of these mapping exercises. What I'm trying to say though with not waiting is, if you have these little sort of blind spots in your network, and maybe it's an access issue, maybe those systems are on a different domain, and it's going to be tough to get them in. Unless those are going to stop you from mapping a specific application, that doesn't mean you should just like forego doing service mapping, right? You should try to get that done, because it's a big value add, and it's going to give weight to your CMDB. and make it more than just an inventory of systems, which is really what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're trying to get better than that. That was a long
Right.
answer. I don't know if I've addressed your question, but I hopefully that.
You did. That was great. And I was actually provided a list of subnets
Okay.
by our security team because we were actually doing SecOps implementation right now, VR and SIR, yeah, security incident response, yeah. And so our security team provided a list of subnets for the critical systems that are being scanned by Tenable.
Okay.
So I'm coming by that. And as far as the infrastructure is concerned, I'm getting serious pushback from the networking team. So that's something I'm working through for them to get access to be able to, discover those CIs. But yeah, I do have a list of subnets that I started with, and I know that so what I do need to get now based on what you just gave me was a list of applications in each subnet. So I have to figure out how I can get that information and then I can start service mapping. So it's two separate things then, what I'm doing, right? The CSDM implementation and populating the CMDB with the business capability application, application service and so on is separate.
Yeah, you could think of it as separate. I would say that to be as complete as possible, right? You wanna be able to bind the CIs to the app service. If some customers will get there eventually, right? And then they'll feel good about what they did from a SDM standpoint, and that's fine, right? It's a dealer's choice, right? In my personal opinion, to be as complete as possible. I want my CIs to be able to bubble up to that application service level.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have a laundry list of applications, and a lot of app owners maybe don't even have a diagram of their app, right? If you can do a tag-based map, and I don't know if that's going to be a capability for you, if you don't have tagging in some of these environments, that might be a limitation. But if you do it that way, you save yourself a lot of that guesswork of, did I get everything? Because in a top-down mapping exercise, you need the app owner to tell you certain things like, what's the front door URL, like what's the entry point, what's the criticality of this app? There's some like metadata kind of fields that you want to populate so that you know what's most critical to your organization. And that means that you're going to have to bring these guys in, these gals in to talk, right? And so that always takes more time than if you could do something a little bit more independently and just sort of tell them you're doing it and have them be more consulted and informed rather than having them play such a required role. But typically in a tag-based mapping exercise, it's just what I showed, right? It's a laundry list of apps, map them, and then it's more of a making sure that the application team knows, hey, we built a map for you. Does this generally look right? And even if they don't have a perfect crystal ball to say, yeah, that's perfect, at least you know, generally speaking, that those apps, those systems are part of that application, right? It allows you to do bigger things.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all. I think that's all I got.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to help. And absolutely. And if you want to know more, always feel free to consult your account team, because they'll bring someone like myself in, and we can have a talk about how it's going, what you've run into so far, and get you some point guidance as you go along.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick one.
Sure.
Your diagram of the CSDM 4.0
Yes.
has been the most amazing one I've ever seen. So that's also going to be up on the digital form, because you've seen different variations of when you're talking to a business customer, all that clutter. Yes, I called it in the normal one. That one is so easy to digest. So that'll be up on the form as well.
Yeah, I'm going to post all of these slides in addition to the ones that John had in his deck as well. Yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
it's a little bit of just a cleaner, less minutia kind of a view of it, less colorful maybe. I don't know.
No, it's perfect, because what I'm going to do is then take the ServiceNow applications and map them in, because we do SPM and EA.
Sure.
And
Yep.
because there are so many applications as part of that suite, to be able to show what that really looks like. So yes, congratulations. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, and when you're doing that service mapping, like when you're trying to show the application services for ServiceNow, a good way to kind of illustrate that at that bottom level in the CI world is those mid servers, right? So those are the components, right, that help make it work. So that's a good way to sort of, that resonates with a lot of customers, I find.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, Happy to help.
And the recording for the presentation will be available as well?
It should be. You know, I wasn't the one that kicked this off, so don't hold me to it if it's not. But I do see that we are recording right now, so hopefully that is. But I believe it will be. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Roland, this is Greg. I got a question.
Sure.
This is Greg with the state of Colorado. So we have 1,300 active maps that we've got started, that I've got started. And some of them map nicely top down, and many of them don't. And is there a technology, just like a low-hanging fruit, that you would target that I guess the patterns recognize? And I think also one of our biggest challenges is, you know, external customer entry points.
Yeah.
So our DNS doesn't always resolve. Gotta go get the IP address and those kind of items. So I was just curious if you had another low-hanging fruit tip other than your tag base, but I like that as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud a bit here. When you do top-down mapping, it does come with its share of very firm requirements, right, in terms of what access you need, right? Because we're going out and scanning those systems like we do in discovery. In fact, we're running some of those very same discovery patterns again, and then we're trying to match them up against application installation patterns that we have in our database, right? And then that database is always growing. We're always learning more about what's out there in the world, but they're never perfect. They're never, they can't, for example, detect if you have some highly customized app and you've installed it in this really wonky way. It's not going to match one of our patterns, so we won't be able to finish out the map. I would say that I don't know that I have a quick way to solve for that specifically, but one thing that could help, it's a little bit, sorry, I'm popping around here in my deck here, but maybe more of think of it like a pipeline into your top-down mapping exercises, rather than you having to go out and knock on, application owners' doors and saying, hey, I want to map your app. What do you got? We might be able to, if we have a pattern already and we're already detecting through our fingerprinting that application's there, we can go ahead and start that machine learning based map, which ultimately is feeding your top-down map. It's a top-down map at the end of the day, right? But something like that could be a good way to funnel in and keep a pipeline of systems to map. But aside from having the appropriate access and these kinds of things, it can be a real challenge. The other way that might help you too is if you're doing a mapping exercise, like if you have maybe you're trying to map something that's like the DNS only resolves publicly and things like this, you might have to get creative with where you put your mid servers to do some of those maps, right? So rather than trying to map certain applications from the same exact mid server that you do, for all your internal stuff, you might have to purposefully, locate a mid server and point it to a DNS that differs from what you have in your internal domains. And so I've seen a lot of customers have to get kind of creative with where they put their mid servers and how they decide which mid servers will scan which systems. And so that might help you, but I hate to say it, those top-down maps can be really tough, right? And so that's another reason why we keep saying, like, don't just rely on those. See if you can get it in a tag-based approach.
Yeah, no, I like that tip. Thanks. Is there just follow up? So we do got some great machine learning apps, but they are never titled the same as the business apps, right? So, I mean, obviously, if you have an out-of-the-box system, you're going to see that recognized, right? Like we got all kinds of Tanium stuff, Tableau, but if it's a custom app, any tips on how to align the machine learning app name with the actual business app?
Yeah,
not named this app.
You should be able to, I mean, when you do a map, I mean, you could set the name to really whatever you want. It doesn't have to be what it's found. You can adjust those, but I mean the patterns themselves can also be adjusted, right? And this is not always this is not the easy mode. This is more the advanced class, so to speak. But you can also do pattern adjustment and those kinds of things to try to tweak those. You create new patterns and ultimately map your applications that way. But again, then you're going down a little bit of it's tough, right? You gotta put those together, and you gotta make it work to what you've installed. But typically, what I'll see is like customers that have consumer off the shelf sort of turnkey cookie cutter applications will usually have patterns of those, right? But it's when they've maybe customized off of that consumer off the shelf, or they've gone and built their own thing entirely. That's where it's hit or miss whether or not, right? And so we sort of crowdsource more information where we allow customers to feed us the patterns that they've learned over time to help improve our index of different patterns. But it's always a work in progress, right? There's always new stuff out there and weird things that have been built over the years. I don't know that I have an answer for you that's good, but it is something that you'll want to work through, and then maybe there's an option to punt and do a dynamic CI group instead, or do a tag-based map as a good enough map to get by so that you're at least getting the functionality.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I'm gonna close this up here in just a minute. Any last questions? All right, perfect. Well, hey, thanks all for attending today. We appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.